Since we're a bit tight on the schedule, let's just continue now. So we just heard 3 very, very interesting inputs in the discussion that was more of activists on the local ground. And now we want to talk a little bit more and focus on the international level. And we have 3 experts here, which will give us some short remarks, and after that, again, we can open up the round for discussion and also invite the activists that we heard before to raise their questions to our experts. So let's start first with Lea Rössner, and she works at the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. There she's office manager for the Rapporteur on Missing Migrants, which is Julian Palke from the Green Party in Germany. Lea especially worked on setting up a database where migrants who died on the journey are being identified and documented. It's called the Missing Migrants Report, and we will hear probably more from her in her remarks. Thank you, Lea.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the introduction. I will get into the details and clear a few things up. Also thanks to Marco, Astrid and Halima for providing all the information. In the first round that was really insightful. So I think it's a bit of a change of perspective. We've been focusing more on what is happening in Europe, so in the Mediterranean and the land borders and in Europe, and also not focusing exclusively on enforced disappearances, but more broadly on migrants going missing. And I work as head of office and policy advisor for Julian Palke, who's a member of the German Parliament and a member of the Green Party, and cannot be here since the Green Party has their big party convention today. So I'll fill in. And so Julian is also a member of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, in short PACE, and it's quite easy to confuse the different European Union institutions and the Council of Europe. So the Council of Europe is separate from the EU, it is bigger, it has 46 member states, including the Balkan states, Turkey, Georgia, Armenia and Azerbaijan. Russia left 2 years ago after the war started. And you could call the Council of Europe a human rights infrastructure in Europe. It consists of the European Code of Human Rights, which is most well known. And then there's also the Parliamentary Assembly and the Committee of Ministers, where the governments of the member states are represented. And so in the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe in 2022, Julian got appointed as rapporteur for the topic of missing migrants, and since then we've talked to a lot of representatives of international organizations, NGOs, activists, forensic experts, academics, UN bodies, and also to governments, including the foreign ministries and embassies, but also to national police and their disaster victim identification units, for example. And Julian, I couldn't join him back then, but he also traveled to Greece in order to see how the national authorities dealt with the Pylos shipwreck last year, where over 500 people died in the Mediterranean, and also to observe how the registration and identification of bodies at the land border between Turkey and Greece in Evros works in practice. And what happened then? All this information was condensed into a 20-page report with recommendations titled Missing Migrants, Refugees and Asylum Seekers, a call to clarify that fate. And this report was adopted first by the Migration Committee and then by the plenary of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe on 1st October this year. And as the recommendations are recommendations to the member states, they are now being forwarded and presented to the Committee of Ministers as well. So what's in the report and the recommendations? I'll give a short overview. So there is a call for saving lives at sea, stopping pushbacks and providing safe and legal pathways in there, but we decided to focus more on not these very political demands, but more of how to deal with the dead, with the missing, get more into these humanitarian or technical details. So the report explains who missing migrants are, why they go missing, and why it's important to clarify their fate. And it lays out the legal frameworks and makes reference to existing conventions, protocols, and guidelines. This includes, for example, the European Convention on Human Rights, the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearances, and the General Comment on enforced disappearance in the context of migration, which you two will probably talk more about, or, for instance, state obligations under the law of the sea, namely the Sahara Convention. And then it maps and brings together observations, challenges, and best practice examples with regard to assisting families and reporting the missing, as well as launching an investigation, registering data, and identifying a body that is found. The report makes recommendations to the member states to take action, and this includes, for example, to assist families by issuing short-term visas for family members who seek to come to Europe in order to identify their loved ones and say goodbye, or even to repatriate the body to the home country. Also, support to families is needed with regard to providing information and knowing where to turn to when searching for their loved ones, or to support families when it comes to the logistics and costs of matching DNA samples. The report also reiterates the obligation to search for bodies after, for instance, a shipwreck, and to seek to identify the bodies and not just bury them without any name or registration or further trace, what you also referred to in the beginning. But instead it calls for a dignified treatment of the dead, and this includes that graves are individualized, clearly identifiable and permanently marked, and that effort is made to respect the religious and spiritual beliefs of the deceased person when these beliefs are known. It urges states, so in this case European states, since we talked a lot about resources as well, it urges the member states to allocate sufficient resources to forensic and corona services, for instance, and considers very practical aspects such as the need for sufficient space in a morgue, pending autopsy, identification, burial, or repatriation. And then we saw that while there are attempts and examples, there still is a lack of national, regional, and international databases where DNA photos or any additional information on a migrant who is missing or on a body that has been found can be entered into, and that can be searched if someone is looking for the relative. And the report therefore recommends establishing such a database. And this, of course, comes with many questions and many challenges. For instance, so far we have spoken with the international organization Interpol. They have the infrastructure in place where national authorities can feed information into the international network, and they already have a database for missing persons. They were open to consider expanding it and setting up also a database for missing migrants, and in doing so collaborating with other organizations. But of course this database question is still a big one. And overall there's a long list of recommendations in the document. So in the end you might ask, what's the use of this report? And you could certainly say it's just a piece of paper. There's no way to enforce what's in there, and it does not really offer assistance or remedy in individual cases. Still, I think this was the very first report on the issue of missing migrants in the Council of Europe. And I think that advancing the issue, calling for action and keeping the conversation going, just like what we're doing today, is really important when we seek to assist families that are mourning their loved ones and seek information, and also when we try to bring about structural improvements and changes. And I think, as we've also heard before in the first rounds, there's always been families and activists and support networks bringing this forward, calling for information, for justice, for structural changes, and they've always been the starting point and the driving force. And in this sense, I think it can be very beneficial to bring civil society efforts to the attention of international and state actors. And I'm under no illusion, the European Union and EU member states will most certainly pursue harmful and violent policies of externalization of migration control, of pushbacks and drowning. So the policies that make people go missing in the first place. And we do desperately need a change of these policies and practices, and unfortunately it doesn't really look like this is going to change anytime soon. Nonetheless, of course, we have to continue advocating, and at the same time I do have the impression that there is some traction in Europe at the moment when it comes to the issue of missing migrants. When we, during our work, spoke to government officials, even really conservative ones, many of them did acknowledge that how we treat the dead at the European borders, whether or not they receive a dignified burial, whether they are identified and information is provided to the family, that these are relevant issues. So I think by adopting the report, the issue of missing migrants has appeared on the agenda of the Council of Europe. I also know that there has been on the agenda of the Working Party on External Aspects of Asylum and Migration of the European Union this summer. And in the beginning of the year, ICRC had established a network of national focal points for missing migrants where European and African governments are asked to join and then work together. So I think these are all very small steps and puzzle pieces, but in the long run they can be useful for families as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So we now move from the European level of the European Union to the United Nations. Gravina Baranovka, I hope I pronounced it right, works for the United Nations in the working group against enforced and involuntary disappearance. And this group deals with the convention that we already mentioned. Gravina will probably tell us more about this convention, and with countries that not have yet signed it. And she also deals with structural issues relating to forced disappearance.
Wonderful, thank you. So I will time myself, so I will not go too much over time. So first of all, let me thank you for organizing this event in a way that the first panel was on grassroots organizations. I think it really gives kind of the right perspective on issues, and also helps to put the things that we are saying into a better perspective and show how they should be understood. But it's also a tribute to the organizations that you're representing here. And we've worked with all of you, so we have received submissions at the working group. So it's really wonderful to have you here and to be able to be in a panel after all three of you. So what I will do today, I will start first with a bit of a legal comment on what enforced disappearances are and how they should be understood, or how they can be understood in migration. Then I will, so this will be more about the law, and then the second two parts will be more about the institutions and maybe even more directed towards civil society, kind of with this idea of what's useful. So I will firstly talk a bit about what is the working group and what is the Committee on Enforced Disappearances and how they differ. And here Silke, I'm sure, will then add to that later on. And then I will go more into detail about the working group on enforced disappearances and what we specifically do in the context of migration. So starting with the legal question, an enforced disappearance, as has been already said here, has to be the combined effect of three elements. So first, there needs to be a deprivation of liberty. Second, it needs to be conducted at least with the acquiescence of a state. So usually it's state actors, it's someone supported by the state. Acquiescence is really the lowest threshold. So there's a connection to the state. And thirdly, there needs to be a concealment of the fate, a whereabout of the person, or denial that the person was deprived of their liberty. So in more kind of easy ways, we can say it's a secret deprivation of liberty conducted by a state, right? So this is the three elements that all need to take place together. So when we look into this, we do all know that enforced disappearances in migration are occurring, right? There's no doubt about it. At the same time, we also know that there's a lot of migrants going missing, and not all of them are forcibly disappeared. Only those where those three elements that I mentioned are met. So this is kind of also where we need to think about the usefulness of calling things enforced disappearances So the usefulness of the framework, I would say, is twofold. So firstly, currently, almost no disappearances in migration are called enforced disappearances. So we don't have court judgments on the issue, even on policy level. We hardly ever call them enforced disappearances. We, as a working group, regularly send messages saying, well, this resolution should set including enforced disappearances, because it's not only missing, it's also enforced disappearances. So the first thing is, we don't notice them at all. And by calling what is an enforced disappearance an enforced disappearance, we actually do give back the rights to the people that deserve them. And the second element where I think applying the framework of enforced disappearances is useful is that it requires states to prevent disappearances, and that's extremely helpful for migrants. So we do know that a lot of migrants get disappeared within detention, and if states would do with regard to detention what's written in the convention, definitely less migrants would disappear. There's a lot of elements about the search of disappearances that apply not only to forcibly disappeared persons. So here we have a whole framework of prevention, of search, that applies beyond just the enforced disappearances. So this is the two elements where I think it's important to think that enforced disappearances in migration are occurring as well, while acknowledging not all missing migrants are forcibly disappeared. Now moving on to the working group and the committee. So this can be a bit confusing, as there's two bodies dealing with enforced disappearances at the UN. We have a working group on enforced disappearances, a body that was created at the UN and exists since 1980, so it's a very, very long existing body, and a committee which has an extremely important meaning because it's a convention. So finally, after many years of working group existing, there was a convention adopted, as has been said here in the room before. In 2006, in 2010 it came into force, and once it came into force, it created the committee. And the committee and the working group are currently existing next to each other, and they do have different functions. So there's some functions that the committee has that the working group doesn't have, and vice versa. There's one procedure that both of them have, where it has been agreed when the state has signed the convention, only the committee deals with that. So there's this one overlap where definitely it's only the committee that deals with it. So for example, the three countries that we've talked about today, so Niger, Sudan, and Libya, only Libya is not a state party to the convention. The one kind of overlapping mechanism that both have is something which can be called the search mechanism, so a search request. Within the working group, we call that humanitarian mandate. So if somebody disappears, a request can be filed to the working group, and we send a letter to the state saying, this person disappeared in those contexts, can you please tell us the fate and whereabouts of that person? And then when the state responds, we send that back to the family, but we basically only act as a channel of communication. So we send reminders, we might reach out to other states, and exactly the same function also the committee has. So to avoid overlap, all the cases that would be brought to us with regard to Sudan, we would then refer to the committee. At the same time, only cases that have happened after Sudan has ratified the convention can be brought to the committee. So if a family has, for example, someone who has disappeared in 2015, where the Sudan was not yet party to the convention, this case, a request for finding the fate and whereabouts of the person could not be brought to the committee, but it can be brought to the working group. So that's a bit complicated, but that's kind of the line in between. So if asked by civil society what is kind of the most important, like the added value of the committee, I would say the state proceeding. So every state comes to the committee and has to go article by article how it deals with the convention. That's an extremely powerful tool that the committee has, and the state has to say why it implements or doesn't implement the convention. Then the second thing is something that Asya, you said, just like holding the paper in the hand and saying, you promised, right? You ratified, it was your decision to do. That's a really powerful tool that the committee has and that civil society has once a state has ratified, that is not existing at the working group. And then the committee has also individual cases. So if it accepts individual cases, it can act as a quasi-judicial body. So there's a violation of the convention, it can be brought to the committee. So what's kind of the added value compared to that on the working group? So it also deals with states that have non-ratified the convention, obviously, and it has a number of procedures that are very flexible, that are in the special procedure mechanism where it can deal with various elements. And it's not kind of bound then by the convention. So in that sense, civil society, and it does and it should use both mechanisms with kind of the added value of each of the mechanisms. So now, ending on the third part, what is the procedures that the working group had? So I already mentioned the humanitarian mandate. And here to the humanitarian mandate since 2019, the working group has added a mechanism which is called enforced disappearance acts tantamount to enforced disappearances, which are acts committed by non-state actors that are in control of territory. So this is, for example, the situation in Libya, where we do send requests if somebody disappears on territory, if the family reaches out, obviously, to us, and the person disappears on a territory that's under control of non-state actors. And here we have actually sent also to the authorities requests sent to us from families of migrants that were allegedly disappeared. Then we have something which we call general allegation letters, and on every session that we meet 3 times a year, we send general allegation letters on structural problems in a country with regard to the Declaration on Enforced Disappearances, which is the legal document, the declaration is the legal document that our work is based on. And not often, but sometimes, we send to states general allegation letters that are solely relating to migration issues. So recently we sent a general allegation letter to the US, which was solely on alleged violations of the declaration because of the situation on the border and outside of the border of people, of likelihood of disappearances on boats and so on. So this is kind of not the core of our mandate because we usually would not, but migration is a big issue also in general allegation letters. And general allegation letters are really about the Declaration on Enforced Disappearances, and we sent them out, just the working group, to states. They are confidential for 60 days. Within those 60 days, the state has the possibility to respond to our letters, and then they get published on the webpage of the UN. So after those 60 days, every civil society, every human rights lawyer can use those general allegations also for their own advocacy and for their promotion in their own country, also in other countries. Then there is a procedure by all special procedures which is called joint allegation letters. So if there is violations that is not only about enforced disappearances but also other issues, we would send them together with other special procedures. So for example, we send very often letters together with the special rapporteur on extrajudicial killings. We have sent many times letters together with the special rapporteur on migration and so on. And then every year we adopt reports that comprehensively map a certain issue. So in 2017, the working group adopted a study on a report on enforced disappearances in the context of migration, which is, at least in my opinion, at this point, much less relevant since there's the general comment of the Committee on Enforced Disappearances in Migration. But the topic of migration comes up also in other reports that the working group would each year adopt. And I'm a bit over time, but I could give one example. So to end up with regard to the humanitarian procedure, what links back to kind of this legal definition of what is an enforced disappearance. We do get, not very often, but we do get requests to search for the fate and whereabouts of migrants that have crossed the Mediterranean. And here, this is very difficult for us because if there's no other example of detention by state actors, that would not in itself be an enforced disappearance. So if it's only the fact that the family has lost contact with a person that has went on the Mediterranean, we cannot register the case with the working group. However, if there is an indication that there was a connection with state forces on the travel, then we can. So we have only registered a couple of those cases, but the cases were, for example, a boat that was in touch with a rescue boat, and then that was the last time it was seen. So then we said, well, since it could have been rescued, that's where we see there could be a detention. We don't know what has happened. The responsibility to explain the fate and whereabouts of those people is on the authorities that were with the persons. And then there's a couple of migrants that have been registered in a very dubious way while coming into Spain, and those we also agreed to register. So kind of authorities have mentioned that they've crossed, and that after that they disappeared. So the assumption is they reached the territory, and after that they disappeared the last time they were in the authority in the hands of authorities. So this is kind of, we are also of course trying to stretch and to try to understand how much there is, and there's a huge legal discussion of what still is an enforced disappearances, where the borders are. But practically it's really important always to have an assumption of detention and an involvement of the state. And this is in many migration contexts extremely difficult to prove, and we know that also from people on the ground.
Thank you very much for the really clear framework that you gave about the committee and the working group. So we are going on with Silke Voskier, sorry. Thank you. Silke works for the committee against enforced disappearance, which, as Regina told us, is a body of the UN Human Rights Council. We will now hear more from Silke about what the convention actually, we already heard it, about what the committee is now doing, and what are the states that sign the convention, and what happens in case of the violation of this convention. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not a lawyer, but I will have to make a few legal remarks in the beginning, and then I will switch to the more political discussion. And I need to clarify, I'm not a member of the Committee on Enforced Disappearances, as Kajina is a member of the working group, but I work with a member of the committee, who is Barbara Lochbieler, a German member of the committee. I work at the German Institute for Human Rights in a project to support her work there. And immediately before she started, she was invited by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to a conference where she had to talk about enforced disappearances. And she used to be a member of the European Parliament before, and in that capacity she worked a lot on refugees and flight and migrants and all this. And I was supposed to write a briefing for her. And then I read some guidelines on enforced disappearances and saw the connection with migration and enforced disappearances in the context of migration. So I wrote a little note in that briefing for her, and she presented it at the conference, and she got in a interesting discussion with a diplomat afterwards on that subject, whether this really needs to be a focus or not. And then Barbara decided, okay, it has to be focused. And then Kajina came into the picture because I'm not a lawyer, but we needed someone for a study at the German Institute for Human Rights to map the ground, to see what's in the convention, what are there some deficits, or is there a need for explanation? So Kajina wrote a study, a one-year study, and this then was the basis for the first general comment that the Committee on Enforced Disappearances adopted. General comments are kind of, legal, non-binding, but legal interpretations on a particular issue from within the convention. So basically, this general comment explains and elaborates the obligations in the convention in the context of migration. And as the whole convention has a very preventive character, the general comment has it as well. And Gradina already explained the aspects in there that are so relevant. And I would like to add just one particular aspect to make it very clear, as this was discussed in the first round already. We spoke about victims of enforced disappearances and families. But
Article 24 of the Convention clearly says or clearly defines victims of enforced disappearances as any individual who has suffered harm as a direct result of enforced disappearances. So, family members or friends searching for someone forcibly disappeared, be it a migrant or not, is also a victim with rights, and this is in the migration context especially, particularly important, because when family members are searching, even crossing borders, they have rights to do so. They are not some people knocking at the doors, could you please help us? No, we have a right to help us. And I think in this context it's very important to be aware of. And for example, the comment has a whole paragraph on the obligation of states to support those searching for disappeared migrants, yeah? Via interstate cooperation, consultation, setting up mechanisms, setting up the databases, there it is again, and all this. So, having said this, on a more political note, the EU and Germany also were very clear supporters during the time when the convention was negotiated and then adopted. Finally, Germany was one of the first states to sign and ratify it. Yeah, they were fans of it because they said, well, it doesn't really relate to us. We have no cases of enforced disappearances in our countries. So it's fine with us to support it. And then we can go around and ask other states to ratify it as well. By now, 14 years later, they are responsible and they are on the blame, at least in this context. Yeah? And as you asked about why it takes some states so long, and Germany was one of the first to ratify the convention, but it took them 13 years to finally establish a separate crime of enforced disappearances in the national criminal law. Yeah? A lot of advocacy work was needed on that. So, in this surrounding, they can simply no longer pretend that they are the human rights champions. And we can see that in words and in deeds. And in words, during the last Human Rights Council session, the High Commissioner on Human Rights, Volker Türk, in his global update, found very clear words on those responsible for the very negative migration discourse. He mentioned that there are those politicians amplified by some media outlets who scapegoat migrants, refugees and minorities, as we have seen, for example, around electoral periods in Austria, France, Germany, Hungary, the United Kingdom and the United States, to name a few. They capitalize on anxiety and despair, pitting one group against the other, and they seek to distract and divide. History has shown us that hateful words can trigger hateful actions. Political leadership grounded in human rights and evidence-based debate are the antidote to all of this. And I think he very well described what's going on in the discourse in our country and in other European countries as well these days. And when it comes to deeds, I remember when Greece, that has ratified the convention, was in the dialogue at the Committee on Enforced Disappearances, I think 1.5 years ago. And in that dialogue, of course, migration came up. And the Greece delegation outright denied that there are any pushbacks taking place at their borders, although they are so well documented. I mean, perhaps we are used to this from some dictatorships in Human Rights Council to say everything is fine with us, yeah, in Russia and North Korea and else. But this was very, very strange. And they were not even agitated. They were just sitting there, just take place. There are no pushbacks at our borders. That was really great. And then just one further example, as Mokhtar, you mentioned it, that deals with the EU. These days, I don't know whether they have finalized it yet, but these days the EU is negotiating a deal with Egypt's dictator al-Sisi to prevent Sudanese people fleeing from a war criminal who was before another of the EU contractors in the so-called Khartoum process. And this is so cynical, but it really puts the finger in the wound of the EU migration policy and the consequences it has. For example, in Niger, where this law that you mentioned was a direct consequence of the EU's migration policy, or the EU's attempts at all costs to prevent refugees coming to Europe. We surely can discuss this further. Finally, what all of us brings together, and you said when you described or explained the report that was adopted by the Council of Europe's Parliamentary Assembly, and you said perhaps it's just a piece of paper. But this piece of paper references to the general comment and therefore to the Convention on Enforced Disappearances. So it gives another, or it highlights, or it gives some visibility, if even on paper, on this and the connection and the European responsibility for all this. So there's another paper, and then there will be another paper, and a discussion in the plenary. And by the way, I followed the discussion in the plenary when the report was adopted, and it was, well, also interesting and a clear connection to the quote of Volker Türk I just mentioned. So what I think is important about all these papers is to spread the word and to refer to them and to hold those politically responsible to account and to make them aware that these are. We wrote, when this general comment was adopted, there was a discussion going on in Germany, another discussion, or again, about criminalization of sea rescue operations and so on, and the German Minister of Interior was kind of fueling this discussion. And then we sent her a letter and told her, well, Germany has obligations under the Convention of Enforced Disappearances, and you probably are aware of that, but just in case, here's the general comment, and you can see and read the paragraph on criminalization of support activities. No surprise, we didn't get an answer, but we spread the word, and we do that with other politicians as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. We will now have about half an hour for an open discussion. We thought with this idea that we could do it a little bit openly, and whoever wants to could also join here on the stage and ask the question directly, or you can stay sitting as you like. And we especially would also like to invite the grassroots activists that we already heard to address their questions, but of course also from the audience. So feel free to ask. Yes, Harina. You want to come in front, or you just stay?
So thank you so much for the briefing, and it was a lot of information to process. Some of I was not aware of. Definitely I would share with my colleagues. We would definitely be reaching out, reporting some of what we have, what we think you could is within your grasp of reach. So I have a question for whomever can answer me. So you mentioned something about the families of the enforced disappearings, the having the rights. So how would you say they could obtain these rights, and like which committee to reach out to? I mean, specifically, how can they speak up, like forcibly, like obtaining information from governments, either in Europe or back home or whatever country they cross, like for example, Libya?
Yeah, thank you for the question. When we have a closer look at the situation of migrants and their families, they are a particularly vulnerable group when it comes to enforced disappearance. When it comes to searching for forcibly disappeared migrants, they might be in a precarious situation, either in their home country, or in a transit country, or in a destination country. Irregular status, afraid to talk to authorities, language barriers, responsibility for other family members. And then they don't know whom to speak to, which door to knock on, where to ask. Even if, or especially if they don't know where or on what part, which part of the route the person disappeared. Was it still in the home country, or in transit, or another transit country, or in the destination country? So which country to contact and where to ask? And this is, I mean, even if you are the family member of someone disappeared perhaps not in Sudan, but in Mexico, for example, then you know, okay, it's in Mexico and I need to contact the Mexican authorities. But in this migration context, very often it's much more difficult. One of the suggestions are or the recommendations in the general comment are that state consulates in third countries have on their website or a clear focal points, contact persons named responsible for those issues. Mexico, for example, which has a huge migration and enforced disappearances of migrants problem, and they set up contact points in all of the neighboring countries where migrants are coming from. It's not perfect, not at all, this mechanism. And all civil society we talk to from Mexico and that region, they say, okay, it's not perfect, but at least it's a beginning, and it could be developed as a model for other countries as well. So EU embassies, consulates in Libya and Sudan, in Niger and in other African countries should have a focal point where family members could go and ask for example, and just one issue. The states should set up databases or regular documentation forms at the borders. This is a very delicate issue because many migrants don't want any of the data recorded in these processes. So there need to be ways to manage that with regard to data protection and not providing those data to immigration authorities. It's not an easy issue, but it's a very, very important humanitarian issue with a legal obligation behind it. Then there is the question, if there is a If you remember, you probably remember, in June or July 22, there was this incident at the Moroccan-Spanish border on Melilla. There's this huge fence, and more than 1,000 migrants stormed this fence, climbed that fence, and then they were targeted from the Spanish Coast Guard with rubber bullets, and the Moroccan security authorities, their borders, and then a panic broke out, and migrants fell from the fence, and some of them died, others fled in the forest, and some of those wounded were taken to hospitals, others perhaps to the morgues, and it was really awful, and nobody until today held accountable for that. And of course the Moroccan authorities said, well, the Spanish, they shot first, and the Spanish said, well, no, they shot first. Makes no sense, but the problem is that when relatives or NGOs looking for those taken to hospital or those dead bodies to the morgues, they were denied access to the hospitals, to the morgues, so they couldn't look for them. When later some of the dead bodies were, DNA samples were even taken, and then they were buried, and most of them were from Sudan, and Sudanese families wanted to come to Morocco to identify their relatives. They were denied visa. They have a right to do so and to come. And it's a long way to go, but those are the obligations that are clearly mentioned in the conventions, and that states need to be held accountable.
I just shortly wanted to add two things. First on the law, and second on what the working group has done. So with regard to the law, it's really, there's no doubt whatsoever that families of forcibly disappeared persons are also victims and have rights. And this is most importantly today the convention, but it's also a number of judgments of the European Court of Human Rights, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, a number of treaty bodies has said so, a number of domestic courts. So this is the rights of families of forcibly disappeared persons. It's legally not even a debated field anymore. So what's debated may be the exact scope of those rights, right? Kind of, but not the fact that they do have rights and that they are victims. This is really out of the debate. And of course, the enforcement of those rights. So we do know that in many states it is difficult, actually, and very dangerous for families to search for their loved ones, even though they have those rights. So this is what I wanted to add. And one more thing on the law, because obviously we very often highlight the right to search, the right to know the truth about the disappeared persons. But the fact that they are victims of enforced disappearances means that they have rights that go beyond just rights to the search. They have the right to reparation, they have the right to clarification of the legal status, they have a number of rights that go beyond just the search. So this is just on that. And then we do know that this is an extremely problematic issue on the ground, and I wanted to just name 3 things that we have done to try to address that. So we have issued with regard to states general allegation letters specifically only on the situation of families. So I think that was last year we sent a letter to Sri Lanka which was only on the situation of women. So on loved one searching. So it really was on their rights, on their behalf, how their rights are violated. Together with other special rapporteurs, we sent the joint allegation letters with regard to families of disappeared persons and how their rights are violated with regard to Mexico. So we would really, like this is something that we really address beyond just the forcibly disappeared persons. And then on practical matters, what we try to do to support families that have registered their cases with us under the humanitarian mandate, we have procedurally the possibility to also inform other states about the request to other states. So let's assume a Sudanese person gets disappeared in Libya, and his wife is in Spain. We would then, the request under the humanitarian matter, send of course to Libya, where he was forcibly disappeared, but ask the wife whether she also wants it to be sent to Sudan and to Spain as also states involved, and if so, then we would ask those states to also conduct actions to support that person. And we have, in specific situations, also addressed especially Western European states with very specific requests asking them to support the family. So this is also something we can do, but those are actions we would only do in coordination with the families, as not always the families would like other states to be informed, especially the country where they fled from would. And if their status is not regulated in the state where they are currently living, then they would usually also not like the state to be informed. So, but this is also a possibility to reach other states. And then you ask what can be done with regard to other states. And here, legally, the right of families of disappeared persons is not only to be provided by realized by the state that has disappeared the person. So it's also other states that might have certain obligations that definitely have some obligations, and then the scope can be discussed. So if I'm here in Germany and my husband has been forcibly disappeared in Ukraine, then of course the Russian Federation that has disappeared my husband would be responsible for the search for releasing him and so on. But I could claim that the authorities here, if I would have legal problems putting my kids to school because I don't have the agreement with my husband, that would be on the authorities of the German state where I live to help me realize that. And that's based on the convention. And also if I would need the state where I live to support me in the search, that I can also base on the convention. Of course, the state of Germany would not have the obligation to release my husband because it's not responsible for that, and they could likely not do a lot to search for their fate, for his fate and whereabouts, but they could do a number of steps, and I could base those claims on the convention. This is, however, a topic that's still very much developed, and the two groups where that has been most developed with in Europe is Syrian disappeared persons. There's a special commission on a special UN commission, and it specifically relates to states where there's Syrian diaspora that has forcibly disappeared persons back in Syria. And then the second big group that is addressed very often is Ukraine and the forcibly disappeared with the in the context of the full-scale invasion. But this is something that's developing, and especially if there's a bigger diaspora in the country, I think that's an argument also worth making in sympathetic states to get that support. And legally that argument can be based on the convention.
Thank you so much, also for making concrete. Did you want to add something?
Maybe just very briefly, because maybe there are other questions. Just practically speaking, I think when a family is looking for loved ones, you mapped out the different ways to go, reach out to embassies, ICRC might be a good point to reach out to. But then, to be honest, I think the infrastructure that we have in Europe is really insufficient. And I think you probably know, if you've interacted with different groups or actors here in Europe, it's often civil society and activist networks that work in Poland, for instance, or in Greece, for instance. It's the same thing. For instance, there's one forensic in Evros at the land border who has his own database that he runs by himself, basically. So if families reach out to the embassy, they need support by activists usually, who then on the ground know how things work and can assist, and maybe have heard of specific cases or can bring together these specific information. And then also talking about Greece, just as one example, when Julian met with the former Minister for Migration in Greece, he said, oh yeah, providing a visa for families who are looking for for missing persons or possibly disappeared persons would actually be a good idea. So we'll make this easier, and I assume this hasn't happened, but maybe, yeah, generally lobbying, approaching governments, approaching maybe even parliamentarians, and just keeping these individual cases and individual requests for information and justice, but also the topic overall on the agenda is, yeah, probably a way forward.
Thank you, and thank you for the questions. Are there more questions? I think, yes.
First, thank you very much for this presentation, for us to remember again how the whole structure is in the working groups, and it gives us a bit of hope again, because after your presentation we feel like, okay, it's like we are all together, because you also are doing a part of our job, or a kind of, to raise this issue. But at the same time, it complicates the thing for us, because seeing the institution, because seeing UN, seeing EU, for us, we think that we need to go toward, or sometimes we need to blame those institutions. And now we feel that, okay, we are on the same...
Keep blaming them.
Yeah. So that's why the question maybe will, okay, seeing how this is going, how do you think we can challenge the structure even? Because in the working group, if we see how all this is going on, we at the civilian society organization Leben, we are doing our best to provide evidences, even if it is very difficult and sometimes even irreal to give those evidence, but we are trying our best. And you also at your side, you are trying your best also to work on it, to bring the states or the countries, the powerful countries, to tackle this issue, but it's still going on. By this way, how do you see the future, when or till when we have to wait, or we think, is it possible even one day to get it? Because we are in touch every day with new families, new people looking for, so every day counts, and it's been already some years that we are working on. This is maybe my question, politically first. And the second is legally. You mentioned one point about this case on migration, that there are 3 evidences that should be shown, the prevention of liberty, the accuracy of state or state agents, and also the denial. And in the case that we mentioned, I think all those proof are there. But you mentioned that a lot of migrants died, but not all of them enter in this framing to maybe have a legal complaint. So my question will be, in legal procedure, that is still numbers worth, if there is an amount of this case that we should or record that we should fill to make it legally complainable or accountable for the state, or even one is okay, because at least there is a lot of that exists and that full those 3 points that you mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you for the excellent questions. Just a remark, we only have 10 minutes to go, so maybe we can just do it.
I will just answer very briefly on the first part of your question. And I can tell you, we are all as much frustrated on the slowness, on the complicatedness and all this of the human rights system as we are. That being said, we nevertheless continue to work on it and to make the best of it. And one remark is, at least the treaty bodies and also the working groups couldn't do their work without the input from the NGOs. No more to be said on that. If we had a state dialogue on Sudan one day, the committee members couldn't do that without the information you submit to the committee. We couldn't have adopted the general comment without the broad support and input from NGOs. Second remark is the treaty bodies, the working group and the Human Rights Council and others, they can all do or all be only as good as the whole UN system is. And if there are big states preventing actions to be done or the necessary resources to be allocated, then it's difficult. And the Convention on Enforced Disappearances is of the Human Rights Conventions, the one with the lowest number of ratifications. It's only 75, I think, at the moment. So more signatories, but 75 conventions. So we can't go to Russia or the US or to Libya and so on and take cases from them. Then we can, victims coming to the committee from Libya and we say, sorry, not our business. Yeah, not that thing. And then the financial limitations, they are there. And so our committee can only do one country visit per year. And the special rapporteurs, they have been limited in the numbers of traveling they can do as well. And we all know who's responsible for that.
Thank you.
So the first question is the grim question, right? So me personally, I'm not very hopeful that things will change to the better soon. I think the elections that have happened over the last time and that are upcoming really show that there will be in my opinion, no good face to migration. So what are my two buts? First, we still should criticize all the bad things that are happening. We can do at the working group, good MPs can do at their own parliaments, and civil society can do. That's the first thing. And the second thing we can do is with regard to missing migrants, as much as we can, never forget the criticizing, but as much as we can, also frame the issue as a humanitarian issue where we can get more people on board. So even the Greek minister is fine with people traveling to search for their loved ones, right? People understand the element of, even very conservative people, of giving decent burial. Things like that can be phrased in a language to get a broader acceptance of people, which will not solve the underlying problem, but will make the life of a number of families better. And that's at least something that I think realistically we can achieve. So this is, but again, not forgetting criticizing, which is still important. So with regard to the second question, well, there will always needs to be a deprivation of liberty. So what exactly then is a deprivation of liberty or not would be then legally decided in every context. So some lawyers would argue within a pushback, if a person is kept in a way and cannot move back and forth because there's police from both ways, that's a deprivation of liberty. States would argue that's not a deprivation of liberty because the person is not under direct force. So those are questions that would need to be decided by a court. Still, there's some open questions. But as long as there's a deprivation of liberty, that's always an enforced disappearance. And there's then the denial of concealment. So this is kind of where we do agree. And with numbers, both the working group and the committee and everyone dealing with enforced disappearances, as the IOM Missing Migrant Project, the ICRC, everyone says the numbers we have is just the tip of the iceberg. We do know there's so many more numbers. So even if we have one number, that's still good to build a case. We the working group, we often tell civil society that's in the most dangerous states, if it's dangerous for you and the families to bring cases to us, don't do it. We cannot protect you. We will find other ways. Wait a couple of months or send another letter or address in other states. That's better than putting people in danger. So there's a number of ways around without putting the numbers up. I agree that it's good to show there's a lot of numbers, it looks good, it gets more political support if we say 1,000 people have died, right, than one person, even then one person is one person too much. But there are other ways to frame that as a disaster without registering hundreds and hundreds of people. So I think that's always kind of this balance needs to be struck, and to me the safety of people on the ground always needs to be the priority.
Thank you. We would have time for a very quick question, if, this has to be not too long.
Actually, I don't know about the audience because
No,
I feel like we are just.
yeah.
Actually, my first question is already been raised by Mukhtar about the legal framework for the. But my other question is about the Khartoum process itself, because Silka, you mentioned it. And Khartoum process. I said Khartoum in Arabic, sorry. Because we know that this program, it has been like with our previous government. But when this program came just to stop migration, and unfortunately, I don't know how they, at that time, how they select the militia now, they are doing the war to be like the border guarding for to stop the migration. And they use the money at that time, not to stop the migration, but to continue doing the violation, human trafficking, smuggling, and the Khartoum process it's bring another violation. So I don't know, after all the time, how now, for example, Council of European or here the institution of the UN, how you look at this? Did any government trying to evaluate what's happening in Khartoum process exactly? And now you're talking about they are bringing again with Egypt or something like this. So I don't know how you're going to deal with this issue. It's not going to stop the migration, but it's going to bring another violation for the people. If we are talking about freedom of movement is everybody's rights, now it's violate the rights of everything. So how you look at it? How you going to, as a civil society organization working in the grassroots, we saw this, but also we report it for you. How you look at this Khartoum process?
My answer would be I don't want to look at it. I want to close my eyes and don't see it.
I have a similar thing. Sorry, but I want to add to her comment is that the fact that at certain point EU was stopping migrants from migrating through the Mediterranean, and then that got criminalized. I don't know, and the EU countries stopped pushing migrants, but yet they found another way to keep migrants from migration to the European countries. It was through giving resources to international organizations who in terms as well gave money to, for example, in Libya to coastal guards to bring back those migrants. So helping, the EU found a way around the laws that were implemented to stop pushing migrants, but they found a way through giving resources to international organizations who in turn as well gave these resources to the countries responsible. One of them is IOM, of course. So how are we going to stop this as well? It's another violation with more makeup to it, I guess.
If I knew how to stop that, I would be awarded with the next Peace Nobel Prize for sure. But no, I don't know. And very briefly, and Leah knows much more about it. I don't know if this was ever evaluated. Well, even if it was evaluated, obviously for no good, because now there's the agreement with Egypt, there are the agreements with the Libyan coast guards, there are also the agreements with other African states to improve the situation on the ground. That's the nice wording of it, but in fact to prevent migrants from coming to Turkey. And it's ongoing. And again, I think there is a strong connection to the words, because those in political responsibility are trying to do what they think that their electorates and their home countries want them to do. keep the migrants out. And I mean, for me, all those, but that's a very personal question, for me, all those contracts are a way of pretending to do something. It won't solve any problems.
It's only raising more violations for migrants, because when they are back to where they came from, to whoever is bringing them back,
It only subjects migrants more to more human rights violation, more enforced detainees. So
But
it's
the
not.
official political answer to that would be yes, that's why we want the migrants to stay where they are. Then we don't have to push them back.
Yeah. So I hope something is done by you, at least you're in the European Union working.
Yeah, I think as you said, these are the very important questions, and that goes back to what Rajina just said. I think talking about European migration policy is really terrible and is only getting worse. And if you look at what EU officials are saying, it's this weird language around migration and preventing migration and saving life, and it's really horrible to listen to. And to be frank, things are not getting better, but they are getting worse. And still, we're trying on, I think, different levels to take action. For instance, we in the German Parliament, we try to raise these issues and raise them towards our government, towards the EU Commission, and the German public. Then there is litigation before the European Court of Human Rights, for instance, concerning these pullbacks back to Libya, which are also violations of different rights. And in terms of evaluation or looking into the Khartoum process, I'm not sure about the details. I know that there's an evaluation of the EUTF, the European Trust Fund for Africa. So there has been some work done on the European level in terms of following where the money goes and looking into accountability. And there are some approaches to human rights monitoring in terms of external action of the EU, but this is all very insufficient and things kind of keep going. So not a very happy note.
I'm sorry that we have to end with such depressing words, but it's great that we have the chance to come together and to discuss today. Thank you all so much for your time and for your questions and for being here today. And I'm sure this will not be the last event where we came together. So have a great weekend and hopefully see you sometime soon again.
Thank you also for moderating.
Yes, thank you.
we just have to worry about all these questions.
Thank you.
Question. I know you have to wrap up, so I don't want to take too much time of you. So I checked your page. You're looking for volunteers sometimes, or like.